Hi, I'm Colleen Thomas with Kentucky Distillers Association. I'm here today with Trey Zoeller, founder and chief strategist for Jefferson's Bourbon. We're going to talk a little music, a lot of bourbon, and hopefully we'll get a few epic stories in here. Trey, I want to start from the beginning, okay? What were you listening to in high school?
In high school, I had kind of an eclectic taste. I think maybe in 6th grade, I had Led Zeppelin posters all over my wall. And then it kind of evolved into Kool and the Gang, Zap, some different music like that, Earth, Wind and Fire.
Nice.
And then I think I went to school in New Orleans, so I really jumped into the New Orleans sound. I was into the Neville Brothers, got to see them all the time, the Radiators, kind of a lot of Southern rock or kind of bluesish rock at the time. So I had a great exposure to a lot of different music down there.
So you're in high school, you're sitting around, high school, college, all of it, you're listening to your music, you're thinking, I want to make bourbon when I grow up.
Not exactly, but it did kind of evolve that way. I grew up here and everybody drank bourbon. You went to my grandmother's house, she didn't ask you what you wanted to drink, rather how do you take your bourbon. It wasn't until I left and went to New Orleans and I moved to DC and Colorado and Charleston, South Carolina and Las Vegas that I couldn't find bourbon. You basically had your choice of Jim Beam, Wild Turkey, maybe Maker's Mark, and that was about it. I did have some experience behind the bar in New Orleans and in Charleston, so I was exposed to it a little bit, but it wasn't until I would come home for Thanksgiving or Christmas and I would drive past all these distilleries that I knew were just chock full of bourbon, that they were either blending this great old age bourbon into a 4-year-old or it was evaporating off into nothing. About the same time, my dad bought a barrel of Bushmills Irish whiskey with 4 other guys. And they bought this in 1993. It was going to come of age in the year 2000. It was going to be 25 years old. They bought the barrel, they went and visited at the distillery, and then it was bottled up. And I thought, if you could do that with Irish whiskey, why can't we do that with bourbon? And there was no such thing as a single barrel program at the time. So I just went and talked to all the different distillers, which were only 8 at the time, and they couldn't give bourbon away at the time. So they were more than happy to sell it to me.
Oh, that's great.
So that's originally what I started doing, was buying different lots of bourbon from different distillers. They would call me at the end of a fiscal quarter or year and say, Trey, I've got 400 barrels of a 17-year-old or 500 barrels of a 14-year-old. Are you interested? I said, send me samples, send me pricing, and we'll see. So it was very different back then. I actually bought 400 of the last barrels that would have turned into Pappy Van Winkle. And I paid less per barrel than what I paid for a pour of it the other day at a bar in downtown Louisville.
Oh my goodness. So they were all sitting around at the end of the year going, what am I going to do with all this bourbon? We'll call Trey.
And they didn't have anybody else that was dumb enough to buy it. So in hindsight, it turned out to be a great idea, but at the time,
Sure.
I thought I could help make a higher end bourbon market, which really wasn't in existence at the time.
Right. Right. So we didn't just go from school to fast forward here. Your dad knows a little something about bourbon. So you come to the bourbon industry, you're looking to get into the bourbon industry and you have a brand. You don't have a distillery, you're not a quote master distiller. Were they welcoming?
To some degree. For the most part, yes. One, again, as I said, all the distillers, there were only 8 of them, so a lot of them were selling to me. So in that respect, yes. But when I started doing some things that were a little bit different, maybe not so much. What I'm trying to do is push the boundaries of what bourbon can be and push the definitions of what bourbon is without bastardizing it. That's why I'm always using fully mature whiskey before we start manipulating it one way, shape, or form. So it depends. Some of the purists thought some of the things that we were doing weren't in line with what the spirit of bourbon was. I think a lot of what we were doing was before its time. Now there is such a quest for knowledge about bourbon and what you can do differently. And really what we're doing is we're just putting more time, money, and effort into the process to massage it one way or the other. So we're not trying to cheat the process or accelerate it, just enhance it. Play around.
So you've got a kind of a reputation as the mad scientist of bourbon. So tell me a little bit about that. I know that you say you like to manipulate, because there's only so many variables you can work with, right? Mother Nature kind of does the rest.
Well, yes and no. There's actually a lot of different variables that you can play with. And over the last 22 years that I've been in the business, I've had two real big aha moments. One was when I became a barrel chef at Independent Stave Company at their headquarters in Lebanon, Missouri. I'd been to the cooperage in Lebanon, Kentucky many times. Bourbon barrels are pretty rudimentary what we do with them. There's 4 levels of char, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Deeper the char, the more porous the barrel is. But when I became a barrel chef, I worked with barrels that, wine barrels and spirit barrels from around the world. And there were so many different variables that we weren't utilizing in bourbon. So it kind of gave me the idea, why don't we start bringing some of these variables into bourbon? So we've done hundreds of different experiments where we're extra seasoning the barrels, we're grooving them out to give twice as much surface area. We're using new wine barrels with bourbon heads. We are putting a flash char on them and toasting them to bring out certain flavors. So we've created some proprietary barrels out of that, and we've done a number of different experiments where we put bourbon into these new barrels that have suspended staves that have been toasted at different degrees, and try them every month for 36 months to see how they evolve. So those are some of the things. And then we've also looked at the agitation and environment of where you age it. And you look back to the history, you talked about my dad being a bourbon historian. I look at how things evolved to the way they have, and it's all out of practicality. So if you look at changing the environment or the agitation of bourbon like we've done with our Jeffersons Ocean, it really manipulates or massages the bourbon one way or another to give different flavors.
So Jefferson's has been a part of Bourbon Beyond the last few years, correct?
We have been. We've had some great times out there. We brought some people in, but we sponsored the Beyond VIP a couple years ago when we had the Great Deluge. And God, we had so much fun going out into the rain and watching David Byrne and Lenny Kravitz, John Mayer, just one right after the other with just coming down in buckets. And it's one of those things you got to run towards the light and enjoy what you've got and enjoy all the rain just pouring down on you and not worry about it and just to have fun with it.
I think that's such a great perspective, because so many people look back and go, oh, it was so terrible that year. But it was even the artists were just going with the flow.
It had to be so cool from their perspective to look out and see the rain coming down and seeing the fans going crazy within it. So yeah, I loved it. I thought that was a hell of an experience.
Any favorite performances that you can?
David Byrne was fantastic. Last year, Zach Brown Band, I thought they were so expansive. I thought they were going to be a lot more one-dimensional than they were. Those were two that really stick out, had just a great time and really got into the music there.
So you mentioned that Jefferson sponsored Beyond VIP. What's the experience like?
Great to have that covered tent and access to everything, that to be able to have a bar right there and bathrooms accessible. And if you wanted to get into the rain, you're right there. But if you wanted to get out of it, that was great. So, and we had some great partnerships. Edward Lee and I did a dinner for a very small group right there next to the Beyond VIP one night. So that was great. I actually met some fantastic people at the dinner that were guests that I still keep in touch with. So that was a pretty cool experience.
Edward Lee, now he's a character.
Edward Lee is a total character. Good friend, and he and I partnered on a product, our Jefferson Chefs collaboration. So actually Edward, myself, and another friend were out drinking bourbon all night, and we went back to 610 to his restaurant. And one of my friends who was in the wine business at the time brought some wine and said, Edward, what kind of food should we serve to pair with the wine that I brought? I said, well, I'm going to continue to drink bourbon. What kind of bourbon, or what kind of food should we order to pair with this bourbon? And it sparked a conversation, and we decided to make the first pairing spirit. And we did that, and we worked at it for about 9 months. It was a really tough assignment. I had to go down and eat his Korean fried chicken every couple of weeks and pair it with different bourbons that we tried to blend to hold up to it. So what we ended up doing at the end of the day was taking 2 bourbons and a rye whiskey, blending them together. So it was kind of a seesaw of flavors. That Korean fried chicken, just had all that flavor, and then this big bourbon and rye had all the flavor. So it was, one didn't dominate the other, they just complemented each other.
So, okay, so we're talking about Jefferson's. We've talked about your chef collaboration. We talked about Jefferson's Reserve. Let's talk about Jefferson's Ocean. This may be one of the products you might be most well known for. I'd say it's probably a global phenomenon, literally. Just where did you get this idea to strap bourbon barrels onto the bow of a ship and send it all the way around the world?
So I happened to be on a friend of mine's ship called it was called the Ocean at the time. Chris Fisher, who's a local Louisville boy, it's his ship, which is kind of odd being a landlocked guy who's done twice as many expeditions as Jacques Cousteau. He catches, tags, and releases great white sharks in order to collect the data to really work on sustainability and the abundance of the ocean, whereas he boils it down to make sure our grandkids have fish sandwiches to eat.
Wow. Wait, were you catching and tagging sharks while you were on this boat with him?
I've done that before. However, in Costa Rica, we were not. We were catching fish, we were trying to surf, and we were drinking a lot of bourbon as we sat on the bow of the ship at night.
So that's when all the genius ideas.
That's when they all come together over bourbon. But I watched the bourbon sloshing back and forth within a bottle. And he was about to take off on a journey to go to all these exotic ports around the world, and this was my excuse to go join him on that and go ahead and taste the bourbon. So I suggested, let's put some barrels on your ship. He suggested it's probably not such a great idea since his crew catches great white sharks. But the more he had to drink, the more he came up with a great idea. Let's put some bourbon barrels on the ship. And he did. So we put 5 barrels on his ship. We put new fill so it went in clear like water. After 2 years, he gave me a call and said, Trey, I've got bad news. The bands on 2 of the barrels had corroded and burst. At least that's his story.
Right.
I know the crew. I think they had their own access to the barrels that might have depleted it. One crewman knew more about it than most, so his name was Juan, so I called those barrels Juan Share. But nonetheless, after 3.5 years, he brought the barrels back to Key West, brought the boat back. We tapped into the barrels, and what came out was, it was black in color, it was thick, and it was absolutely delicious. So we sent one of the barrels back to be reverse engineered. We saw a few things happen. One, as it was constantly rocking back and forth, you've got constant contact with the wood, which imparts flavor, which also acts as a filter and takes out the astringency of the alcohol. We now cross the equator 4 times, so that extreme heat caramelizes the sugar in the wood, makes it very viscous, and then the sea air permeates the barrel and gives it that briny flavor. So people call it the salted caramel popcorn bourbon. So when we got those off, we really looked at it and saw when you change the agitation and maturation and the environment, you really get different flavors. So today we put bourbon that's been aged for 6 to 8 years out on the ocean. It goes to 30 ports on 5 continents, crossing the equator 4 times. And even though it's basically the same route, depending on what it encounters or what time of year it takes off, it gives it a really different feel. So each voyage is a little bit different.
And is this the ship that's tagging the sharks?
No, we keep 4 barrels on his ship.
On his ship, okay.
And those 4 barrels we auction off for his charity, and we also give a portion of all bottle sales to the osearch.org organization, which is a charitable organization. The rest go out on a container ship. We put the barrels in cradles within a container, which is on the very top of the bow of the ship, so it gets as much pitch as possible. It's kind of got sunroofs in it, so it's getting rained on, it's getting beaten on by the sun, so it's really getting exposed to the elements.
So you mentioned Tedeschi Trucks. What is it that you like about that band?
Oh man, they've got just such a great presence, and they've got 12 people on stage. The slide guitar, Derek Trucks does it, just like the Allman Brothers. He's so talented. Both of them are so talented. They're both big fans of Jeffersons, from what I understand. I got a video of Derek Trucks drinking some of our presidential select.
So they've got great taste.
Exactly, they've got great
music,
taste.
Great taste.
You bet.
And you know, they are actually from Danny Wimmer's hometown of Jacksonville, Florida.
I didn't realize that. Well, Danny, please bring Tedeschi Trucks to Louisville. We would love to see them. As a matter of fact, I would love to invite them out here, and we can do a special single barrel pick for them. So let's get them out and let's get them here in Louisville this summer.
So what's your go-to karaoke song?
Give Me Shelter.
Really?
Yeah. Stage presence again. You know, little Mick Jagger, you can always default to some of his moves. So
That's all it takes.
right. It deflects of how bad the singing is.
So I am fortunate enough to be asked, maybe out of desperation, to host a couple of the panels at Bourbon and Beyond on the Bourbon stage. So I'm wondering if you would be interested in doing something like a little bourbon maker genius karaoke for the fans. At the very least, maybe a lip sync competition.
Sure.
We'll get Ed Lee up there.
Yeah.
It's gonna just be, we'll get some of the band members, you know, we'll see what we can do.
I had a great karaoke night with Ed Lee and Patrick Callahan from My Morning Jacket one random Tuesday night. Ed was singing The King, Elvis, Patrick, Madonna. So I think that's a great idea.
We are gonna reenact that. Got it?
You got it.
Oh, I'm excited now.
It was a great random Tuesday night that we ended up at a Kio on Bardstown Road.
Oh, Akiko?
Akiko.
Yeah, that's because that's where you go.
That's where you go on Tuesday.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, it was fun. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, we'll do it.
Good.
All right.
Good.
All right.